Idaho bureaucrats dug themselves a budget hole that will be nearly $15.6 million deep, chalking it up to mismanagement in the agency. This is just the latest of budget woes that continue to vex the Idaho Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, an agency that deals with adults with disabilities in the workforce. It was only a few short months ago that the agency came to the legislature asking for $2.7 million in additional funding for the 2024 fiscal year. Fortunately for the taxpayer, this request was discarded in favor of more sound options, but continuing management issues within the agency made it difficult for it to stay on budget for the 2025 fiscal year. Come 2025, the legislature must force the agency to change its behavior rather than continue to fund mismanagement. We will discuss how we got here, the current budget deficit, and things legislators should consider this spring on this week's episode of Fiscal Fridays. The discussion about a budget deficit in the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation started in early April. In the closing days of the 2024 legislative session, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation submitted an emergency request to the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee for $2.7 million to address a shortfall lasting for the remainder of the 2024 fiscal year. The division director at the time, Jane Donnellan, was unable to detail how the department got to that amount and why there was a deficit in the first place. The error was chalked up to a revolving door of financial officers and even transitioning to LUMA. But the central issue was that the department only tracked their spending against available funds, not appropriated funds. In essence, they ignored the legislatively determined budget. In response to the crisis, the division noted in a letter that they would set, quote, fiscally responsible budget limits and educate staff to be good stewards of funds, measures that should have been already in place. Additionally, many of the balances the agency claimed to owe vendors were inflated. So much so, in fact, the agency was able to make some changes to stay on budget without legislative action last year. Despite the changes from last legislative session, there's still a $15.6 million hole to fill in the division. Many of the reasons why there is a shortfall in the first place were not rectified at the source, in the administration. In a more recent letter to lawmakers explaining the shortfall, Interim Director Judy Taylor noted the cause was due to, quote, mismanagement. Now the federal government is offering to repurpose $10 million to the division to help with the shortfall. This would require the state to put up $2.7 million to match the funds. The legislature is still without concrete answers as to why the division is nearly 60% over their originally appropriated budget. Simply stating it was caused by the abstract notion of mismanagement is not enough. Though some of this year's shortfall comes from using funds from the 2025 fiscal year to cover those costs incurred in 2024, this paints an incomplete picture of the problem before us. Now the department is shuffling funds and requesting a nearly $13 million supplemental next year to dig out of the hole, a cost that will naturally be borne by the taxpayers. Mismanagement is a cultural issue and must be addressed before legislators spend any additional funds to fill the deficit. It is corrupt for the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to overcommit services, causing a budget shortfall, then holding commitments over lawmakers' heads to get more funding. Instead, over-leveraging services should result in ongoing cuts. The department overpromised and shouldn't be allowed to grow simply because it mismanaged these obligations. Lawmakers must press the agency to explain why they overspent and what real concrete program and policy changes need to be made to resize the agency. Legislators should also be asking the question, is the agency even necessary? The truth is that helping people with disabilities really should be a duty of the private sector. In fact, it already is. The agency is simply a hub that sends participants to nonprofits and private organizations that can meet their needs. With this comes federal funding too. Thus, the division is really just a broker for nonprofits and federal funding to subsidize those programs. This goes well beyond the proper role of government. Let us close with this. Taxpayers shouldn't be footing the bill to allow the agency to ignore its legislatively approved budget for growing its programs, let alone an agency that already improperly serves a function of the private sector. Lawmakers must demand answers and real cuts in 2025. Thank you for watching this week's episode of Fiscal Fridays. Be sure to spread the word about our work at the Idaho Freedom Foundation by liking, subscribing to, and sharing our content. The Division of Vocational Rehabilitation is just one example of the wastefulness in our state government. If you want to get a deeper understanding of government waste, be sure to sign up to receive a free copy of our 2024 Pork Report coming soon. You can do so by going to idahofreedom.org/24pork.